All right. John, can you open the slides again? I don't know if Lynn's going to have slides ready. All right, now I'll tell you who Ben Rogers is. Ben Rogers is the curator of the Penn Jones collection, director of the W.R. Pogue Legislative Library. He's been an archivist at Baylor University for 20 years. The papers of Penn Jones Jr. Form the foundation of a growing collection of JFK materials, including papers now from Jack White and Gary Shaw and others. And the archive provides a depository for personal JFK papers in a private institution. And the collection contains over 800 newsletters, hundreds of magazines and newspapers, in addition to the Jones papers. And all of the JFK correspondence of Jack White has been added in the last 2 years. And they have a website at Baylor EDU. Ben Rogers is going to tell us about some new things that are in the collection. I think he had a little handout book to make sure that everybody got one. Yep. Maybe he has another handout here.
Out on the table was a brochure, and I hope you picked one up, and an information sheet about the collection. And John has just about told you everything there is to know.
You can talk from here, yep. That'll pick up.
Okay, there's your photographs.
Oh, okay. Let me see what all the speakers other than me are doing research in the Kennedy assassination. My work is to archive their research. So beginning with the Penn Jones papers, several years ago, we have used that as a foundation for building a research collection. And then Jack White allowed us to copy all of his research material, which is supposed to go to UT Arlington. So we have converted to DVD 178 videos. We've copied over the 800 newsletters, and the first page of every newsletter is on our website. We have about 400 magazines, and all those covers are on the website. The paper that's being handed out, we have spent the last 3 years processing the correspondence of Jack White that he's had for the last 20 years from about the 80s to 99. And the list is just the names of the people in the correspondence. If you'll go to the website, you'll actually find the contents of the correspondence listed. If someone sent him a manuscript, it's listed. If they wrote him, that correspondence is listed. One of the handouts that was outside with the brochure was some of the publications we have that you might not find in other places or hard to find. Things like these early reports that people gave, and people, collector's editions for $1, were very common in the 60s. Is there a way to just advance this as a slideshow, Joe? Most of these won't need any comment because they're on your paper. We've encouraged other people to deposit papers. A man named Roy Schaefer in Illinois recently sent us a box of manuscripts and 2 boxes of videotapes. He had taped off the TV of current events that he thought would be related down the road that people will eventually put together. I've talked to Grover Proctor in North Carolina about depositing his research materials, and Gary Shaw also, along with several other people here at COPA, who've talked to me about depositing research materials. As has been said, it's not always a good idea to deposit things with the 6th floor museum, but we are given an alternative to deposit papers in a private institution, and you can put them there. They can be closed or open. I met with John Armstrong. Is John still here? Well, Thursday we spent scanning the first 5 notebooks of his Harvey and Lee research. Over 6,000 pages we scanned on Thursday with high-speed scanners. He has 72 notebooks of that research, so it will take us a while to put all that in. So eventually we would hope to have it online in searchable PDF forms. The All the articles that we have been photocopied and put into notebooks for researchers. So if you come, you just get the notebooks and you don't have to look at 400 magazines. We just have 400 articles already done for you. All the newsletters are copied in the notebooks. Jack Wright's newspaper research we're still working on, but we already have 23 notebooks of his news clippings that he put together, and the subjects are listed online. So we have an extensive website. We're going to try and have some of you go down to Waco today and see some of these things. We have the original UPI and AP press release teletype we got from Penn Jones, and a number of other things. USA Today called me last week and said, "Hey, we hear you have Ruby's slipper. Could we get a picture of it?"
Who cares?
It took me a while, but it was from his prison
We have the Ruby
days
slippers in D.C.
or hospital. So there's still an interest in this type of thing. So is somebody in the back trying to get your attention?
Can't hear. Maybe talk more directly.
Oh, I can hear myself fine. I could talk closer. Is that better? Okay. So eventually what we hope to have is a research facility where you can come, or we can have things online that you can access, but we need the help of current researchers to deposit their materials, and then we would have them accessible to the next generation. People are getting older. Jack White's in his 80s. Penn Jones is gone. So we hope to provide an archive for these type materials. And we've listed, given you some information on the brochure. If you didn't pick one up, they're on the back table in the back. Any questions about that? You want to see who might be interested in going down this afternoon?
Yeah, I don't know if there are people here, especially anybody that's interested in driving down, taking some other people, to go down to Waco after we finish up on the knoll. We could go down and visit the library. Ben usually sets it up. I don't know if anybody's here that wants to go down there, but if they are, or you'd like to go down but you don't have a car. All right, well, hopefully we can get a small group together and take a trip.
Is there a website that people can go to look at materials online?
Yeah.
We have a website that lists all of these materials. Actually scanning all of them is a little more difficult. We've started with the John Armstrong papers last week, and when those are up and running, we'll let John know, and he'll put it in the distribution list to everybody.
Well, what about all the other stuff, the Penn Jones stuff and everything?
We have it all. The finding aid is online, so you know what we have. As far as scanning it, that's a little bit more difficult.
But you should just tell them the website anyway.
The website is on the handout. It's just baylor.edu. lib/pogue/JFK. Yes, sir.
I was wondering how many of the films from that day you've included in the collection?
Jack White had 178 videos. A lot of them deal with the original footage. A lot of them deal with presentations he made. We also have 14 slide carousels that we're going to be digitizing and trying to put those online. His original show presentations, and we have the scripts for those we can also put online. These things will take us time, but they're in the process already.
Wonderful.
All right, thanks, Ben. There are some other archives for people that are new to this. There's an Assassination Archive and Research Center, Washington, D.C., that Jim Lazar runs. It's been kept for many years, and due to a lawsuit that he had for the Kennedy files, every file that's been released from the JFK Records Act to the National Archives has also been a duplicate release to the ARC. So they're not easily accessible, but he's been sending them up, and they've been being scanned by Rex Bradford. That's another site you can go to online, which is the Mary Farrell Foundation. And Rex has done great work getting stuff up there. They've scanned in a lot of the books related to this, as well as other manuscripts and things. And if you become a subscribing member, you have access to to look up things like they have a search engine, and it'll actually pull up the pages where it appears in the different books. And I was surprised to find out that, judge for yourself, my book was up there and was accessible that way to the subscribers, so I got him to send me a digital copy that I haven't had in many years, and I'm trying to correct all the spelling mistakes that Patrick made. But since he didn't know who I was talking about, he misspelled all the names. Anyway, that's a few of the archives that exist. Unfortunately, a lot of the research material from the first generation was just lost. I was tracking, trying to get information from Holcomb Heston, who I thought was one of the early good critics. He was a newspaper man, investigative journalist. He was dual citizenship, German and U.S. He actually asked to testify to the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission sent a query to the CIA to ask who he was and was he be credible, and they sent back files that said that he wasn't credible. Well, the files they sent back were the SS files on him from Germany, the Nazi files that said he wasn't a credible person, and so the Warren Commission was more than glad to rely on that. But he wrote Oswald, Fall Guy or Assassin, and he did early work on the mob. He did a book after World War II called They Call It Intelligence, about the intelligence agency. So he had a tremendous clipping library in the basement, not just Kennedy assassination, but the whole history. I think that's how he figured out the Kennedy assassination so quick, because he did books on the mob and Lucky Luciano, and his wife, May, when he died, felt that nobody would be interested in his work, and she told the realtor to clean out the basement. So all that was lost. But I mean, you know, some other people have started to give their collections to people like Ben, and some over the years to Jim Lazar. And part of my work in D.C. is I want to establish a museum of hidden history in D.C. We get 20 million tourists a year. I'm sure if they'll come to the Ford Theater to see where Lincoln was shot, they'll come to find out about the Kennedy and King and Malcolm X assassinations, and also the hidden history, covert operations, the history that's intentionally hidden from us by the national security state, as well as the history that's hidden from ourselves by our paradigms and our assumptions and our blindness, and counter-narratives, including herstory and Native American, and so there's a lot of hidden history. I was originally calling it the Hidden History Museum, but one of my sponsors said I shouldn't call it that because people would think that the museum itself was hidden. And I said maybe that'd be a good idea, that we could have the kids get off the bus and some clue cards, and they'd have to look for the museum the way they have to look for their history. But, you know, but in any case, I went to the American Association Museums, and everywhere I could, I got to a microphone and said, I'm John Judge with the Museum of Hidden History, and all these museum people came up and said, what's that? That's interesting. What's that about? So it's got the hook, you know. Somebody asked me, it is a small museum. I said it's about 7 neurons wide. But I'd like to get it beyond that, and I'd like it to have a research center there where we could put some of these archives and collections and make it accessible to scholars and researchers. But otherwise, I think that we're going to lose all of this. I mean, and it's important what Ben does, but it's and there's a collection of Weisberg stuff up at at Hood College in Maryland. So there's little isolated pockets, or Phil Melanson stuff up at University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, but they aren't really centrally accessible. And you know, once we are established, we could do rotating collection stuff and get stuff around to different places. But I think D.C. is a place where, you know, we could have an accessible research center and archive, because Jim's there, but his doesn't get much use either. But if we had people coming in and out of the door every day, I think we'd be able to pick it up. We'd be able to have the new authors speak and show new films. And so that's part of what I've been working on the last couple of years, to try to have some legacy that goes beyond. Some of us are getting a little long in the tooth. I don't know about all of you, but and,
Those of us that have teeth.
that's right, them too. Some are getting short in the tooth. So our next speaker, if I can read them in order now, is Chris Pike, and Chris is another independent researcher. He's contributed to the Baylor University Library. He's very focused on writing something about the early critic Penn Jones Jr., and also has some materials relating to Operation Northwoods. And Chris, you know, like myself, is very interested in Penn Jones's work. Penn Jones was a a field-appointed brigadier general in World War II at the end of the war, when a lot of the officers were getting killed off and they had to field-appoint replacements. But he rose in the trust of his unit. He was one of the people that liberated the concentration camps. He saw that. Then he was given a job as a military police guard at the door of I.G. Farben, which I think educated him in a different way. And I think he understood that the war didn't end, quite. He came back to Midlothian, Texas, this little town to the south of here, and he bought a newspaper, the Midlothian, Texas Mirror, and it was a local town newspaper. It had the bake sales, it had the pig roasts, it had the, the annual things that were going on at the high school. But in the middle of that, there would be an editorial, witness number 76 has died, been murdered in such place. So, he was telling the history of the Kennedy assassination in this little local paper. He put it into books, Forgive My Grief, and he was one of the, if you ever get a chance to see a tape of him talk or hear an interview with him, I recommend it. He had the best sense of humor of many of the researchers, and he was just a great guy. And I had the pleasure of knowing him a little bit while he was alive, but he kept blowing the whistle from that day. He was at the luncheon waiting for Kennedy, and then ran back and started his research on November 22nd, 63, and didn't quit, and had a magazine, Continuing Inquiry, that he put out the 22nd of every month, and he just did great work. So, but is Chris ready to go here?
John, Forgive My Grief can be.
Oh, he'll be back in a few minutes. Okay.
Son still has copies for sale.
Hey, John, I got a question for you.
There should be a link on our website.
Okay.
Oh, the books, yeah. Uh-huh.
Hey, John, we know that Penn Jones was a early critic of the Warren Commission, correct? What about the guy that wrote A Texan Looks at Lyndon from the other end of the political
Everton,
I've
yeah.
always thought it was very interesting that you had this John Bircher, A Texan Looks at Lyndon,
Right.
totally, completely suspicious of Lyndon Johnson. Then you have somebody on the left, Penn Jones, who's pointing the same finger in the same direction. So could you comment on that compare and contrast right there?
Well, I mean, sometimes despite our paradigms, the truth is evident to all of us. I mean, the right and the left sometimes converge, whether it's hating Kennedy researchers or sometimes figuring something out. And I think that what was wrong with Johnson would be wrong in anybody's book. I mean, if they were halfway honest. I mean, I think the only people that trust these people in these political establishments are those who don't have any criteria at all. I mean, they either for financial reasons they're cooperating or promoting them, or on their own for their own interests, or they're just people that they're cynical enough or just absorbed enough in their survival that they don't question things. But both the right and the left question things. So if you start sniffing around Lyndon Johnson, I think you're going to find something out. I mean, it's not always exactly the same critique. You don't always come to the same conclusions. But Penn, he was friends with Thomas Merton, who was a monk and a visionary. Thomas Merton in 1936 said, if America fights Hitler, it will become Hitler. He's one of the few people that had insight that early. And he was friends with Jacques Ellul. If America fights Hitler, it will become Hitler, 1936.
Wow.
Same year that Hermann Goering was saying, I know two types of law because I know two types of men, those who are with us and those who are against us. That's Hermann Goering, 1936. But Penn fought for civil rights. The Klan tried to burn his house down. He was close friends with John Howard Griffin, the guy that did Black Like Me, that made his skin black, and Penn's pictures in one of his photo albums. And they knew each other. He knew Jacques Ellul, the French philosopher, and he was plugged into a lot of people. He believes that Merton was murdered in Paris, electrocuted intentionally, and they said it was an accident with a lamp, but he doesn't believe it and questioned his death. But so I think that Penn was just an honest person. I mean, and it was interesting to me. I mean, here's this brigadier general from World War II, combat veteran, and here I am, a conscientious objector in the Vietnam era, but, we liked each other a lot and, got along pretty well. So I think it's more a commitment to the truth than anything else. And, you know, the right wing can see the truth when it's in front of their face, too. I mean, that's, you know, history. I mean, I remember my mother early on, you know, challenged my critique of the Vietnam War, and she said, well, all you young people, you say the same things about Vietnam. And I said, well, you know, sometimes everybody can see reality when it's there. Penn said, take any aspect of the case and research the hell out of it, because every facet will show you the diamond. And so that's what's valuable about the independent researchers. So here's Chris Pike.
I forgot my power cord.
Do you want to sit?
I may have to.
That's all right. I'll just ask him, because it'd be good if you talk into the mic.
I ran out of the motel room, so I'll just have to wing it. That'll be easier on you, believe me. This is a little nugget, a little piece of information that is based on what I was sitting around watching television a lot in the 70s and 80s, watching all the craziness.
Need you to speak into the mic.
Talk to me? Yeah. Okay. This is regarding Project Northwoods, but of course back in 1981, no one had heard of Project Northwoods. You want me to stand up? Or what? Talk in? Okay, he's doing this stuff. I don't know what he means by
Wants you to speak into the mic. Yeah. So,
Here, I'll raise it, and then you just turn that thing.
How's that? Is that better sound, Ralph? Okay. Basically, you've all heard of... Is anyone here does not know what Project Northwoods was about? Okay.
Could you say it again so everybody will know?
Right. Well, Northwoods was a proposal instigated by Eisenhower from my research.
Move the chair behind the mic so that you can be facing the audience in the mic too. Just move it, if you can do that. You're trying to get the mic on the other side of your face.
Like this?
Back up a little, move the mic, come forward.
chair back again.
Okay, let's do that. Okay. And just stick it kind of more in front. All right.
A little higher maybe too. That base is bad.
I can hold it.
That's the issue.
Just raise the mic, stand.
Hang on.
We got professionals handling this.
Don't say that.
We got enough hands to make soup, I think.
Oh, you're going to wind that around the post. Okay.
Well,
It's been monkeyed with.
I'm going to kick someone in the nuts.
Someone play with it and mess it up?
Okay.
It's good. Yeah, you're pretty well PowerPointed out, so I'll just go right off the top the old-fashioned way. So I was there watching television, and I want to give you a little background. There's a lot of little details I have to fill in here as I tell this quick story. In Los Angeles, we had Baxter Ward on KABC television, and some of you may have heard of him. Maybe not. Does anybody remember Baxter Ward? Yeah. He wore a white suit and he had a black tie. That's all he ever wore. He was a good guy. He ran for county, he was a county superintendent and became part of the reform movement in L.A. They got rid of the old boy network, and L.A. started becoming a real honest, well, not real honest, but a more honest community as a result of Baxter Ward and Kenneth Hahn and some others. So he had veracity, he had credibility, and he was respected by the viewers. So he comes on, and he had, on over 4 nights or 5 nights, he did little snippets of about 5 minutes each on this rifle. And I was thinking, I don't care about rifles, about the Robert Morrow book and all these little disparate pieces of information about the assassination. You know, we just had the HSCA. I don't care about a rifle. So I wasn't tuned in, right? But I'm listening to him anyway because I respected this guy. And he started going through it, and he did time release over 4 broadcasts. But basically what he talked about was a fellow he knew by the name of Richard Hathcock, who wrote a signed affidavit. Hathcock he had known since February of 1964, and or had met and known by that time. He then related a story about how. Well, let me stop one more. There were 4 people who didn't know about Northwoods. Okay, Northwoods was proposed by General Lemnitzer. Actually, he initiated the idea. The initiative was by Eisenhower. He wanted something to go out with when he was leaving office, and so he wanted to invade Cuba if it was all possible. He suggested, Eisenhower did, that some tricky means be utilized to do that. Anyway, so Northwoods was proposed to Kennedy and officially on 13 March 1962, before the Cuban Missile Crisis, okay? But after Bay of Pigs. Go figure. So what we had was a program that was going to be utilizing either sabotage or kidnappings or hijacking of planes, bombings, shootings, murders, any of these types of incidents on domestic shores, and that included Guantanamo, which was considered, which is United States property on Cuba. So the long and the short about Northwoods is that this was a plan to instigate an invasion of Cuba by creating some disorder or major disorder in the United States as a pretext for an invasion. Cubans, the Cuban government, hopefully would be considered to be, ideally would be the sponsoring agent of such behavior on our shores. Kennedy obviously flatly rejected it, and 3 months later, Lemnitzer, General Lyman Lemnitzer, was sent out to NATO and taken off as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and that was the end of his service on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But having said all that, the program didn't die, apparently, the operation, the contingency plans. Now, I'm not going to go into a big litany about what Northwoods was, but I think you're getting the idea, and I imagine all of you now are familiar that, remember, Oswald was associated with Cubans in various sightings and stuff, and there's been a lot of thought and discussion and books, voluminous numbers of books, on this suggestion that maybe if Oswald had not been, had been murdered conveniently at the theater, the Texas Theater, that maybe a pretext for an invasion of Cuba could have been carried out. There's a lot of ways to analyze and speculate, and I won't waste your time with all that now because we really don't have facts, but it's possible that if the president, for example, wasn't killed effectively in Dealey Plaza, that there was a backup plan. I've been researching that because Penn Jones had information or contacts, he claimed, of a backup plan over where the former Cobb Stadium used to be, down Harry Hines Boulevard, about, 3 miles, thereabouts. And he had a mysterious death out there, a guy who worked in the water and power building and was found hanging in his apartment, who saw things going on out there, people on the rooftops of buildings and so forth. So there was a potential there for a backup plan that could have mounted and created but enough of a pretext for an invasion of Cuba, and that's been speculated ad nauseum. So here I am now, and I'm listening to this broadcast, and I couldn't connect it. So I'm going to do that for you. Basically, these two individuals who had signed affidavits, one was named Roy Payne, P-A-Y-N-E, and I don't think there's any relation to the Payne of Michael, and the woman's name was Ruth. We don't want to go there. It's a different spelling. Richard Hathcock was a friend of Ward's and had been ever since 1964 when he met him. And so through all these broadcasts, 5 minutes each or so, I'll give you a few highlights and you'll get the point. Two men unidentified in the broadcast throughout, not Hathcock or Payne, went to Payne, so we have like triple hearsay here, but anyway, and said that they were approached by a Cuban and a Mexican, or one of three people who were thrown out of Cuba on July 9, 1959. So they hated Castro, and these were anti-Castro people, presumably. Quote from the affidavits: they wanted to borrow the $100, but what they had for security was a set of golf clubs and a rifle, which was a .30 caliber Johnson modified to semi-automatic operation, which I believe held 9 rounds, and also was equipped with a 30-power Bushnell variable scope. Efficient for assassination purposes, right? Okay, so essentially we had heard this. This was in front of, this was broadcast to 14 million people roughly at that time in 1981. So this is public information, if you will. Eventually, the loan was given, and 2 days before the assassination, the money was paid and they use the expression redeemed, and the rifle was given back to one of these individuals. That's about all we have on whether we don't know if the rifle was used in the assassination, but Garrison was aware of this. The FBI was within 24 hours of the assassination. managed through millions of people, according to Baxter Ward, to contact one of these individuals who met Roy Payne and Dick Hathcock. And it was just, you know, the idea of the redemption, the loaning of the money, and the redemption of the rifle. Okay, but why were they there to get, why were they needing money? Why were these guys, obscure as they were, giving us collateral, a very nice rifle for $100, okay? These men came to me one afternoon stating that they had heard of me because of my many years of undercover operations. So Hathcock was a PI at the Allied International Detective Agency. It sounds so CIA, doesn't it? They were told that to raise money which to buy medicines and equipment. This is a Northwood scenario here. I think we're getting some indication. Military hardware for a planned invasion of Cuba. Planned invasion of Cuba. Now we talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how Kennedy warded off an invasion, and we had, of course, the fiasco of the Bay of Pigs. Another planned invasion? Really? Now I'm listening on this television broadcast. I'm thinking, okay, this is getting interesting. They were going to train troops in Guatemala, which they actually did later. They told me they were dead broke, and what they were going to do here for 2 or 3 weeks, what they were going to be doing here for 2 or 3 weeks, that they had some contacts that they wanted to see, raise money, but meantime they needed $100. So they wanted to borrow the $100 and what they had for security and so forth. Okay, several weeks after that I saw the men frequently. Then my understanding was that Man A returned to Miami to set things in operation down there for the planned invasion of Cuba. Oh my goodness. They had planned essentially, and here's the big kicker of my little presentation, part of the affidavit, they had planned to blow up some oil storage tanks on the West Coast. Now, that wasn't suggested in the memorandum by Lemnitzer to Kennedy. Kennedy was told that the sabotage would be maybe on Guantanamo or in Miami. Okay. Maybe in Havana. Who knows? Different places they'd talked about. But the point is, this was meaningless in 1981. It's like some guy could have made this up. But Baxter Ward had a lot of credibility, and he knew these people, and this was something that I believe it would actually happen. So there's more. I'm not going to go too much further with it, but this is a little nugget, a little piece of evidence that Norwood's behavior was planned for the Kennedy assassination. There's more discussion about Oswald and how he was introduced, or one of those two individuals was introduced to a Leon Oswald. Now, some of you who are Oswald researchers can maybe even imagine who Leon Oswald, what he looked like versus Lee, or Fidel, or whatever else he called himself. Yeah, the resident had not yet met any of the 3 men prior to then. They told the resident, they were familiar with anti-Castro work done in Cuba by a member of the family of a Dallas resident. Now, the commission got in on this and poked at it a little bit. Commission investigators asked the FBI to check out the background of this Dallas resident who was apparently coordinating one of these guys that borrowed the gun. Borrowed the money with the gun as collateral. The FBI checked and acknowledged the person's background and integrity were considered impeccable. Commission investigators then asked the FBI to look for those other 2 men who supposedly accompanied Oswald on that Dallas visit. Remarkably, all the millions of people in this country or world, Ward said, the FBI found one of the 2 other men. He told the FBI, yes, he had been at the home of that Dallas resident, but no, Lee Harvey Oswald was not with him. J. Edgar Hoover himself wrote to the commission about that interview. My, how important that must have been. A short time later, the FBI re-interviewed that other man, and at that time, he denied having been at the home of the Dallas resident. We kind of wonder who that might have been. DeMorenschild, maybe? Thus, the FBI discredited the story of the Dallas resident, that Oswald or anybody else had visited the Dallas resident's home. So that is another self-contained mystery with a side question as to how the FBI miraculously found that second man. I can tell you about the second man. It was he who redeemed the rifle and announced he was going to Dallas, and who reportedly stated that he was in the Hilton Hotel in Dallas at the moment of the assassinations. Now, he didn't say he participated. And that's about it. And I'm going to try to find those affidavits through his estate. Ward passed away, I think, about 10 years ago. Couldn't find him online, doggone it. It's not that easy. He had a son. I don't remember his name at the moment, but, so maybe I can dig up some more, find the affidavits in an archive somewhere, and provide it for the research community. Do you have any questions? Yes. Oh, I thought you were raising your hand.
Oh, I am. So basically, you're saying that as part and parcel of JFK assassination, that the CIA was planning Operation Northwoods types sabotage attacks to go along with that as a way of as a context for getting that long-awaited invasion of Cuba going on.
As a pretext for the invasion, yes. And this doesn't say anything about the CIA.
Okay.
This shows that certain individuals who had talked about with certain individuals a planned invasion were put on, preparedness for it, but didn't have to go through with it. The Joint Chiefs asked Kennedy for permission to conduct the whole military effort themselves without guidance from the president.
And that day
that's
was-
how wacko this whole
That date
Northwoods
was March 13, 62, when Limnister says that the Joint Chiefs of Staff and I think it would be a wonderful idea to start Operation Northwoods going, basically.
to have it approved.
To have
And
it
then
approved.
they would then start it at their discretion, which was outrageous, taking all the power away from the president and just putting it in the hands of the chiefs.
So, I mean, you didn't use the phrase false flag attacks, but that's what you're talking
That's
about.
exactly what it was,
False
yeah.
flag attacks.
And it's on my PowerPoint, which I can't show you now, but yes, it was a false flag staging program, and it's just amazing. We get bits and pieces over time. We don't know how to connect them all up. And this was just in my files, and I looked at it a second time and thought, wait a minute. I remember something about a planned invasion through Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Northwoods program. So I'll make you, I'll be happy to make copies of this. If anybody, I want to release this to you because I just don't have time to dig into this and find Baxter Ward's estate. But if anybody wants to run with this, who's a specialist in this area, I'd be happy to share this with you.
I've got another question, if you'll
Yeah.
hear me.
Please.
When did the American public and the researcher community find out about Operation Northwoods? When was it?
Came out in the JFK records,
Yeah.
It was 1994. Did
a little later than that, but I mean, we started releasing records in 94.
and when did folks start understanding the significance of that? Like immediately, or did it take a while for it to sink in? Or
9/11.
In Banford, when this
Banford
book
wrote
came out
about
in
it,
'94.
Party of Secrets.
A Body of Secrets came out, what, in 2001?
4 months before 9/11.
Yeah, okay, so it came out in 2001. So Bamford went through all the documents and put that in Chapter 4 of his book. And some of my research, I went right to that. And it's not a bad job he did on that. Yes?
What became of Northwoods after the Kennedy administration? The follow-up question to that is, do you see any relation between Northwoods and the PNAC
And which?
papers? PNAC, Project for the New American Century.
Oh, I do. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to say that today because I think that's speculative, but to me it's right on. It's dead on. I think that's exactly what happened. And it's probably been utilized more times than we even know, but yeah, I don't. There's no doubt in my mind that Northwood.
That they apply.
Yeah.
They say,
Yeah. Northwoods it was just one of many versions. You had Operation Mongoose, which was supposedly Northwoods was derived from it, and all this is instigation, destabilization, sabotage, anything to provoke. And yeah, this has been a pattern in our military history, probably since before. Well, go back to the Maine, right? Well, actually, we don't know whether that was triggered or whether that was just an internal explosion, but it wasn't.
That's why they still supply the
It
war.
was manipulated. Yeah, it killed like half the crew or something. Yeah, so this is a pattern throughout our history, and it shouldn't be as a great shock. But Kennedy had the conscience to not go that way, and I'm very surprised when I researched this stuff briefly in the last several days that Eisenhower wanted to do something to get into Cuba and take it. He was angered by what had happened with the U-2 incident. Yeah, and Bamford speculates that Eisenhower just needed a good win before he went out. I have a feeling that it had more to do with Nixon, who was on the National Security Council, and Nixon and his henchmen were attempting to manipulate government. Eisenhower admitted he was losing control of his military, and so Bamford's very sympathetic to Eisenhower. I'm not so sure where it really falls, but Eisenhower apparently didn't want to be left with a legacy of having lost Cuba. I think we could assume that because he was president when we lost it. Control of it. We didn't own it, but we lost control of it.
Could you go over Eisenhower? You say Eisenhower admitted he was losing control of his military. Are you talking about his farewell speech, or do you have other
Yes.
evidence besides that?
That's exactly what I'm referring to. And that's about the only statement he made on that regard.
Pretty amazing statement.
It really was. A little late, though. Yes?
I was just reading a book recently on the Six-Day War, and
Mm-hmm.
America explicitly told the Mossad and the military intelligence they would not support Israel unless there was a provocation that they could point to.
Oh, my. Yeah. Uh-huh. Anything else?
Same old story.
Yes.
Is there any connection between what you're talking about and the Downing Street memo, where apparently Bush and Blair talked about ways to provoke Saddam Hussein to attack because they didn't have evidence of the WMDs?
It's a mindset. Is there any connections? I have no way of knowing that. I doubt it. It's just the way, this is part of the preemptive strike policy that supposedly our new president, Obama, is trying to put behind. But will the military attempt other things in the future on their own? Will the CIA? It's always a problem. And that's the very core of what I think, Jefferson, remember his expression, eternal vigilance? Well, this is why we're here today. We have to pay attention to what the military does, not just what they do in Congress. And I think what you just asked about, is now a possibility. The techniques have been perfected. It's amazing what they can do. They can take a drone, an unmanned drone, and do anything with it. Take it anywhere. You can carry very, very powerful weapons. This is a very dangerous time. So, yeah, I just say. Keep up the research. I'm so inspired by John Judge and all the work he's done over the years to focus on the military-industrial complex, not just on politics, not just on Congress alone. And the vast majority of the public, they're trying to figure it out right now. For example, it seems to be the football is in the Congress and the Senate. Now, Obama's going to come out. Has he come out yet? He's still holding back. But he's going to suggest how many troops to send into Afghanistan. Well, so he's not letting the military tell him what to do per se, but I believe he will do something to add to troops. He's doing a very delicate dance, in my opinion. I think in his heart he'd love to get rid of the Afghanistan issue, but he also realizes that if we abandon Afghanistan too soon, we're going to have issues with Pakistan and its destabilization. And they would like to get Obama, who may be still in Pakistan. So I can go off on all these tangents, but the preemptive plan got us into a lot of trouble, and we cannot do enough to try to get the 9/11 crime exposed and put into public light more. And yes, I think that's sourced back to Northwoods.
Yes.
False
In fact,
flag.
wasn't part of
Stateless people in this case, yes.
In fact, wasn't part of Northwoods to fly planes into buildings? Wasn't that one of the...
No, they didn't have that. They had about everything else.
hijack planes.
Yeah, they had a drone, I believe. They had drones back then. And I think there was a mention in Bamford's chapter, in Chapter 4, about a drone being used. So I thought, well, maybe, yeah, I guess maybe so.
F-86 Sabres to look like MiG.
Okay.
F-15s, and I'm a flying
That's
kind
right.
of guy, so
Okay.
I know a little bit about that stuff.
Excellent, thank you. That wasn't specified in there, and I'm glad you brought that out. Anything?
They wanted one of the ruses was to make it appear that Cuba had shot down a commercial airliner, including fake obituaries to be sent to the different city newspapers from the plane, but, that they would shoot down their own, who knows what, craft, and then claim that it had been a commercial flight.
Yeah. They got more and more clever and
Climate was a Cuban.
more and more savage as they kept thinking about it. Any more questions? Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, well, let me just say, I had to go out of the room for a minute. I had just written recently, I saw Bamford in a public venue, and I had written him a letter because I had to go out of the room for a second. I didn't hear all of what Chris said, but it's been my opinion for some time that when Kennedy refused to let the Joint Chiefs implement Operation Northwoods that they did implement it on November 22nd, 1963. I believe that Operation Northwoods ended up as the assassination of President Kennedy, as the traumatic incident that would let them invade Cuba, and I found a great deal of evidence that they were ready to invade Cuba that day. In fact, one Navy SEAL brought his wife here to see some films, wouldn't sign my register, but pulled me over in the hall after he came back to pick up his wife and the movie wasn't over. And he said, "Who do you think did this?" And I said, "I think it was the Joint Chiefs of Staff." And he said, "I think so too." And he told me he had been a Navy SEAL on orders that day offshore Cuba to go in and kill Castro when they got the green light. I got Ann Lander's book on the 30th anniversary, Where Were You?, where Kennedy was killed. And she had a section on the military. Military were being loaded onto transport planes at Fort Ord and other bases, and bases on alert, and told they were going to invade Cuba on November 22nd. I think what stopped them was that Oswald realized in the theater that he had been set up as the patsy. He got up and said, "This is it." He put his hand down into the breech of the gun they brought to shoot him with, and he got a little bit of, that's the only place there is any graphite, is right there. He stopped the pin from going in, and then instead of a dead red that they had linked 2 weeks before in Mexico City to Castro, and Castro figures this out if you read the book, History Will Not Absolve Us, and Castro's statement 3 days later, he figures the whole thing out, that they're setting me up. You know, but instead of a dead red that they could say was a Soviet defector, which he wasn't that either, and this ONI guy that they had patsied, they had a talking head, and that head was saying way too much. You can read the accounts of what he said are compiled in an article called The Last Words of Lee Harvey Oswald by May Brussel in People's Almanac #2 by the Wallace, his father and son. And it may be on the May Brussel site, I don't know, but Last Words of Lee Harvey Oswald tells you all. And so they had to have Ruby, himself naval intelligence, and somebody that, when I went into I looked at the Estes Kefauver Crime Commission stuff in the 50s, about racketeering, and Bobby Kennedy was on the panel, and they subpoenaed Sam Giancana, and Giancana refused to testify, and they held him in contempt and put him in jail, and then they moved to subpoena his second-in-command of the Waste Handlers Union in Chicago, a Capone mobster by the name of Jacob Rubenstein, known later as history as Jack Ruby. So a letter came to the commission, and it's in the file, in '54, on White House stationery, Richard Milhouse Nixon, Vice President of the United States, do not subpoena this individual. He assisted us in the House Un-American Activities Committee. How does some strip joint owner in Dallas, Texas, go to a press conference, and when Fritz says he's with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, you know, he says no, or the Free Cuba Committee, and Ruby pipes up and says, no, it's the Fair Play for Cuba. How could he know to correct that if he doesn't know who Oswald is and he's just some jerk who runs strippers? You know, he knew quite a deal, but they had to send him in to silence Oswald before he said anything more, got more public, or, you know, he had already set enough by saying he was the patsy. And years ago at one of the ASK conferences, two of these old Dallas cops sauntered over from the first day evidence, that early book that this guy had from his uncle that kept some stuff, and, you know, trying to say that Oswald did it. And these guys come in, they're grinning at me, and they said, "We hear you don't think Oswald owned a rifle or a pistol." And I said, "I didn't say that. I just said that the rifle and the pistol in the book depository and the other one didn't belong to him." I said he may have owned a different one, but those didn't belong to him. I said they never found a signature card at the P.O. box. The signature on the order sheets to Klein's for both guns was not Oswald's signature. It was in another hand, and another name was on it. A letter sent to Oswald at the box they came through went into the dead letter. If it was his, it would have gone to the box. But then they said they couldn't find the signature card, and so then they said, "What about that gun he brought in the theater with him?" I said, "I think you boys brought that in," because I think they did in order to kill him with the gun they could link to him. And they looked at each other and they grinned. They said, "Well, maybe we did." And I said, "Well, that'd be police procedure, wouldn't it?" So well, you got to say the truth. I mean, you know, you're not going to get anywhere otherwise. But I don't think that this term gets around, and it's been around in the truth community, of a false flag. A false flag operation in intelligence is where you convince the operative that they're working on behalf of a particular nation when they're not. It is what you're talking about is a false sponsorship operation at Northwoods. Okay, but that's different. But a lot of terms the truthers use, they don't, you know, they picked them up someplace, but they don't know the background on them. Yeah.
Question, yeah. In light of all this, since 9/11, folks are waking up. I woke up after 9/11. I was a hardcore right-wing skeptic, and then I got educated very quickly. What do you think may be, well, first of all, do you think they may be emboldened after 9/11 to pull something off even bigger and worse, or in their eyes bigger and better? Or do you think they've been stymied by this growth of the truth movement and people asking questions? Do you think they're inhibited at all, or do you think they're going
No,
to
I don't
press
think they're
forward?
inhibited by that. I think they may be inhibited by the double sword problem that if they pull off another terrorist attack, then they haven't protected us despite all they've done in between. In other words, it can, right, but I mean, it can discredit them as much as give an excuse to get worse.
Do you
So
think that they realize they may pour gasoline on folks like myself, though, and
I hope
thousands,
not.
maybe millions? Well, I mean figuratively. You know, we'll see it for what it is.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, there's always that problem, but it doesn't matter if you or I see it for what it is. That's not what they're going to tell anybody on TV, you know. And so, I mean, I think we make a bit of a dent, or people are skeptical, but people are still stuck within the paradigm. Yeah, Tom?
They may well pull off another terrorist attack.
Were precipitous towards an invasion of Cuba. I heard there was like a division coming back from Europe. To basically clear up those things and kind of educate somebody like me again, if you don't mind, just for a second.
Well, I'm not sure that I could educate you entirely on it. I mean, I just know that there were preparations being made that day to invade Cuba, and then they were canceled. I saw it several places. I mean, I do remember some report of a unit in transit that could have been used. But another thing I went and checked right away, because there were segregated files that the House Select Committee had, which don't then fall under the Freedom of Information Act provisions and could be released right away, and were, even before there was a review board, when the Act passed in '92, a whole bunch of FBI and CIA segregated files and other files were sent over to the archive without review. And in those, there was a box of NSA files. That's the first thing I looked at in the finding guide. Most of them were just printed articles or pull slips. But there was one I went for specifically, which was DEFCON status November 22. That's defense condition. Right. Now, if you buy their story, that somebody had shot the president, parties unknown, or when they arrested somebody, they got a red, you would think that they might be in an alert status. They might be a little bit upset that the president's dead and they don't know who shot him and they don't know what's coming next. But the defense condition status for all of those sectors, USAR, U.S. Army in Europe, and they didn't have a northern command for the U.S., but they had a U.S. Status group, and then they had ASEAN for Southeast Asia, and they had Southcom for Latin America, and they had no change in the defense. Everything sat at 5, which is the stasis level. The only place that there was a change recorded November 22nd was in Vietnam. And in Vietnam, they went from a level 5 to a level 4, which was a listen up, something's going to change. Well, something was going to change. And I know that because of my mother. I know it for a fact because of my mother's job for 30 years in the Pentagon, the highest paid woman, 5 levels above top security at GS-13, which was high in those days. And her job for the Joint Chiefs, Deputy Chief Staff personnel, was to determine the draft call and to project the draft call accurately within 100 people either way. On the annual national call, which got up to 50,000 people, she had to project that accurately using tables, how many will retire, how many will re-up, how many will discharge under different conditions, therefore how many do we need to draft. She had to get it that right 5 years out. And I remember her every year sweating the figures from 5 years before as they came in to see if they were close to what her projections was, and she was always on target, and they replaced her with about 6 computers. She used a little hand calculating machine. Any intelligence I got from my mother. And she had access to the war rooms for briefings. So after she retired and started again to become disaffected, she had been a pacifist between World War I and World War II. Hitler changed her, like many of the pacifists. Then she was bought into the communism, the same as fascism, and fought the Cold War. But Vietnam and the civilian deaths and things started to turn her back around. And so by the time she retired, she was more in my camp than the other side. And I said 3 years out, when did they tell you they would escalate in Vietnam? Because she had to be among the first to know, to make those projections. And
What did she say?
she said that in April of 1963, on orders of the White House, which meant Kennedy, for the first time in her career, she was told to change projections. And the projection she was told to change was a full withdrawal from Vietnam by the end of 1964. So he was absolutely, and she wasn't doing contingency planning. She was the last in the line to get the figures, to figure out how many they had to draft to do it. So this was not a contingency plan. Don't let anybody tell you that. This was an actual plan, and she, for the first time, was told to change it. I said, when did they reverse that and start to escalate? She said, late November. I said, the last week in November. She said, the Monday following the Kennedy assassination. Kennedy's barely in the grave, and they gave her figures, and for the first time, she told me she took them up to the Joint Chiefs, and she said, these can't be right. She'd never done that before. November 25, 1963, they told my mother to project a war in Vietnam that would last 10 years with 57,000 American dead. They know where they're going. You don't, but they do. And they know exactly what it'll take them to get there. And they make these plans without any input from us. But, you know, if we leave the future in their hands, it's going to be what Cheney told us after 9/11, permanent war, war in as many as 60 countries, war that won't end in our lifetime, because that's an economy. And it's part of what I'm talking about Monday night, is the rise of the military-industrial complex. And actually, the first draft of Eisenhower's speech said the military-industrial intelligence complex. No, there's no second draft. First draft is intelligence. The military-industrial intelligence complex.
He had the word intelligence in there.
Yes, and a lot of people talking about this stuff, they say CIA, CIA, CIA. CIA is a stinking think tank. It is a think tank. They're fighting to get the chance to use the Predator drones. They've never been able to do anything before by themselves. The CIA goes to the DIA. The DIA has 85% of the budget. It has 100 times more employees than both the FBI and the CIA combined. It carries out the operations. It's the NSA, the NRO, the Geospatial Agency, Defense Mapping Agency, Army Intelligence, Navy Intelligence, Marine Corps Intelligence. All the branch intelligences are under that. You know, all of the spying and the actual covert operations. They have the guns and the boats and the ships and everything else to carry out. The CIA can come up with the idea, but the CIA is not the ones that are doing it. And you have to understand that when you're looking at these things, that not everything is the CIA. You can find 600 books about the CIA. You find me 5 about the DIA.
Exactly.
You got 2 on NSA by Bamford. What else you got? You got some naval intelligence histories. You can't find out about this. You know, when Pike asked to see the papers on which the DIA was chartered and its legal existence, he was told that that was above his security level, even though he authorized their budget every year, and they refused to give him even the papers showing how they came into existence.
About 15 years ago, I was having lunch with a friend of mine, and his brother was there, who was high up in the military, and I happened to mention the DIA, and he just looked at me shocked. He said, how do you know about that?
The DIA.
Yeah.
Well, NRO, the initials were secret for many years. And
Yeah, well, he was stunned. He said, how do you
Yeah.
know about that?
Exactly.
What does NRO stand for? NRO.
National Reconnaissance Organization. It was a satellite
Okay.
office. Yeah.
Could you tell us about, if you have time, tell us about Office of Naval Intelligence. I've always heard that was
Oldest
like,
and largest intelligence agency, the ONI, came out of the British intelligence. All of the key characters in the Kennedy assassination are ONI background. Oswald's ONI, Ruby's ONI, Bannister's ONI. I mean, when you get into this, you're talking more about military intelligence than you are about CIA. But it's convenient for them to say that the CIA does everything. But the first connection of intelligence to the mob was not the CIA, it was the ONI at the docks in New York in World War II to stop the sabotage, and those connections are more central to the heroin trade even than the CIA connections were.
John,
Read Valentine's 2 new books. He didn't get into them, but Strength of the Pack and Strength of the Wolf, about the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs and the DEA. You'll find out a lot more about this military intelligence history.
John, that was a terrific story about your mom. Was she breaking clearance?
Oh, she told me I should never tell anyone that, so
I wondered about
I didn't.
Well,
But,
I mean,
you know.
that is absolute positive proof that Kennedy ended the war
No
And-
question about
And
it.
that Johnson re-escalated it.
Yes,
Have
well,
you
that's why I get
published
right, you know, but even
Have you
Pierre
published that
Salinger
anywhere?
said, I don't know why anybody questions that he was pulling out of Vietnam. He made me announce it from the steps of the White House at the press conference, which he
Pierre
did.
Salinger, yeah, I've seen that.
But they knew, all the inside people knew he was pulling out of Vietnam, but this was, and I asked the review board to go in and get those files, because there had to have been a change in the Selective Service records, but they said that they couldn't find any files about it.
Have you published that anywhere?
Well, I think the stories in Judge for Yourself in my little book. But,
Oh, okay, great. Thanks.
but when I wrote something about it to the Progressive, they asked me to prove that my mother had worked at the Pentagon. I said, is this the normal thing you do with a letter writer? So I went and got the Pentagon phone directory for 1963, which my mother had in the basement, and showed her, you know, where her name was and what ring and where she worked. But
There's a book I want to recommend relating to the ONI, and that's Al Martin's book, Conspirators, Confessions of an Iran-Contra Insider, which came out in 1999. He's ONI, and in the book he says that's where all the deep, dark secrets are really held, and it has a lot more power than the CIA because it has a lot of assets, physical assets they can utilize.
all that's true, but I would caution against tales by whistleblowers that survive. You don't walk and talk out of these agencies any more than you walk and talk out of the mafia. In fact, the mafia is probably a little kinder to you. The people who really know the inside story, if you don't know much, they don't care if you talk, but if you really know something, they'll kill you rather than
Well, here, I'll give you a...
How did Fletcher Prouty last so long?
Well, I mean, I think if you think about it a minute, who does Fletcher Prouty point to as doing the Kennedy assassination? Is it the DIA?
Lansdale, doesn't he?
Yeah. And who is he? He's Air Force intelligence.
So,
So they spill the beans on each other.
all right, John, quick.
John, what about the day after the assassination? Why didn't they use the Kennedy assassination as a, as an excuse to go against Cuba?
No, I was saying because Oswald survived. Oswald kept them from killing him. If they'd had the dead red in hand, and that story, that was what they were going to use. But then instead, he could have blown the whole thing out of the water.
Was there a chain of command there, do you think, or what? What's the?
Well, there was a chain of command in charge of whether those troops went in and in charge of everything that was happening that day. Strategic Air Command bomber pilots that I talked to during the Vietnam period were in the air the hour of the Kennedy assassination. They told me that they were up and got radio chatter that Kennedy had been hit. They put them up on 8-hour shifts, and all of them went for their code books, their decrypting books, because they assumed there'd be a response. And actually, one of the documents came out, there was like a 4 or 5 alarm bell through the Air Force that something, might come up. They get to the code book, and there's no code book on board. And they told me that's 16 hands off, 16 hands on. It's a whole process. That's the defense of the United States. And when they got down out of the air, every other pilot that was up told them they didn't have code books either. Pierre Salinger says on the plane coming back with the cabinet from the meeting where they changed the Vietnam policy, didn't have a code book on board. He went up when he heard Kennedy was shot. And this decrypting book tells them whether they're getting a legitimate message. It tells them then what coordinates to go to all the way up to failsafe. They told me that they got, when you think about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there's a movie, Never Know How Close We Came, was on the poster, 30 seconds, they told me, from failsafe when they finally turned them around. And these guys, that's not a mafia goon. That's not a anti-Castro Cuban. That's not a CIA schlepper. They can't touch those damn cryptology books. That is the defense of the United States. Who designed that system and knew how it worked? Curtis LeMay. You know that name, Curtis LeMay? You better go look him up if you want to study the Kennedy assassination. And this thing came out of the Joint Chiefs. My mother and my aunt told me that not the bell phones, but the secure lines at the Pentagon between all the federal agencies went dead the moment of the assassination, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, for an hour.
Ted Kennedy running around trying to find a phone.
Yeah, well, there were no
to hear
secure
about-
lines, and that happened on 9/11. They cut off the secure line on Bush's Air Force One. Yes, right.
What do you think they by cutting off secure lines, they...
Well, they're just not letting anybody have a response that they don't want them to have. And while they wanted to invade Cuba, they didn't want to go to World War III that day. And so they cut off the capability of the SAC bombers, too.
What would be the purpose of taking the books out of the SAC bombers?
Because they can't get a command then to do anything. Nobody can tell them to go, nobody that freaks out and thinks it's the Soviets can tell them to go to war.
Oh, so they were.
It would keep them from bombing.
Yes.
So the whole point of not having the code books was they didn't want them to start nuclear war with the Soviet Union. However, they probably had plans to go invade Cuba.
Yes, they did have plans to invade Cuba, but they didn't want that to lead into a nuclear war, and they didn't want somebody outside the loop of the need to know within the Joint Chiefs. These things aren't done with, people say like, oh, the whole government did 9/11. The hell with that. It's got to be a very small group and on need to know and little cells, and then a lot of them don't even know what each other are doing. It's not, that they sit there from the top to the bottom of the government, everybody knows, and they all lie to you. These are things that the Kennedys didn't know about the assassination plots against Castro. They did not know about them. They were trying to normalize relations with Castro, but, you got Chomsky who'll tell you that there's no such thing as a conspiracy, or if there is a conspiracy and it's illegal and they find it, they hate them and they crush them like Contragate, and that the whole Kennedy thing is a waste of time. There's no conspiracy there. There's no evidence. It's just wasting people's time to even look into it. And then I always say, well, ask them about King. So in this book, Understanding Power, the next question is, what about King? He says, oh, that was a conspiracy that went to the top of the government, and the CIA and the mafia were involved in killing. Yes! I mean, it's 180 degrees when it comes to King. And the bottom line is, it was worth killing King. It wasn't worth killing Kennedy. I said, you don't analyze the Kennedy assassination from a leftist perspective that he wasn't left enough for you to think he should have been shot. You analyze it from a right-wing perspective of what the right thought he was, because the goddamn right thought he was a communist. I mean, it's not, you might not think he's a communist, you know what one is. They don't,
The original conspiracy theory is that he was killed because he was about to turn American.
That's right, that's right.
Right-wingers were the original conspiracy theorists, and they said Kennedy was about to become an American, and that's why the communists killed him.
Yeah, that's it.
The bombers that went in after the Bay of Pigs, they were terrorizing Cuba and everything. That was part of Northwood, and that was not Kennedy's intention.
Kennedy refused to give military invasion or air cover to the Bay of Pigs. The CIA staged the Bay of Pigs so that it would fail and force his hand, and then he refused.
But after the Bay of Pigs, there was supposedly terrorism on Cuba.
There were raids on Cuba.
Yeah.
There was a period where Lansdale had convinced the Kennedys that covert operations was the way to go. It wouldn't cost as much, and you could hide the hand. But they very quickly were disabused of that notion after the Bay of Pigs. They realized it was just being used to set them up. And they started canceling the raids on Cuba and blocking them, and they went after the weapons caches in Lake Pontchartrain, and they were actively stopping it. And Bobby was put into Mongoose to call it to a halt.
John, just back to the ONI and naval intelligence, a couple of things. One, wasn't Bob Woodward ONI, and secondly,
yes. ONI Point Man, Vietnam.
All right, and secondly, 2 years ago, Jeb Bush's son, George P. Bush, joined naval intelligence as a reserve officer. I thought I'd point that out. That's how they seat him in the key positions in the military.
Yeah, well, there are times when military intelligence is a contradiction in terms. Yeah, Chris.
Let's not forget the big piece, and that is the photograph of, allegedly identified by L. Fletcher Crowley of Lansdale, right over here.
Lansdale, yeah, walking the other way in the tramp photo, and
That's a
Krulak
signal.
says it's him, his wife says it's him, so
And then
who might argue.
Down here,
Where the tramps were? They were coming down.
No. Where is the photo of Lansdale exactly on the sidewalk?
Where the parking lot is now,
It's in a
John.
number of the books. I think it's in Weberman's book.
Where it was taken.
It was taken in the plaza, I think, along Houston. I think they're walking along Houston, aren't they?
An annex just to the west on the school book depository that's
Yeah.
not there now.
Okay.
And the tramps were walking this way.
Yeah.
Lansdale was walking this way, and as he
Right.
walked by, the tramps lowered their head.
Mm.
And that's
Why
where they
would
were.
Lansdale
And
play
James
that?
Files, if you believe him, whether that's your opinion, he has recently said Lansdale came over before the shooting and asked him if he was ready.
Well, you know what I say about these songbirds is that they're singing from our book. We gave them all the details. They can have all the verisimilitude they want. A good liar tells you 90% truth and 10% lie. He's got to have truth in there, and we keep giving them the details, so they keep adding them to their stories in order to make it. You know, there's only one answer to a guy who says, I shot Kennedy, and that's arrest the son of a bitch. There's no statute of limitations, and then see what he says.
He's right in jail.
But stop giving him a book and writing videos about him, you know, arrest him. You know, charge him. Well, I know, but you can charge him while he's in jail. I mean, you know, go investigate him. I mean, what was all this nonsense of us trying to figure out what he did, you know, and somebody making money off of it as a video to listen to some guy say, I killed Kennedy. My guess is this was an important enough hit that the gunman did not survive too many days longer.
And they certainly didn't hire somebody 18 years old.
But the gunmen will tell you nothing. The gunmen are cutouts. You spend your whole life finding out who the gunmen are, you'll know nothing. I went to the patsy. The patsy will tell you everything, because once you understand who handled the patsy and who he is, that's going to lead you back to the plotters. And it does.
The attack by Henry Lewis and Claire Booth Lewis, were those just freelance?
No, they were working with Paley, and they were part of the establishment, and they had ties with the intelligence agencies. And Time Life was always handled as a propaganda device by the intelligence agencies. So, they were financiers, and they had different groups that had different interests in going back in there. The CIA ran guns to Castro at one point through Ruby and McWillie. And so they have factions that wanted to be in power, but they weren't. I mean, they had segments within the intelligence communities doing things without the approval, is what I'm saying, of the top. So they're freelance in that sense.
Johnny, did Harvey Oswald know about that Kennedy was going to be assassinated? He had foreknowledge of the event, and he thought that somebody else was going to be, the shooter, or somebody else was going to be the patsy? Or what do you think his thinking was? I mean,
well, I don't know Harvey. I only met Lee.
Harvey Oswald.
I don't even know what he thought.
Right.
Except he was trying to tell us he was Oswald.
Right.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I don't even know what John Armstrong could tell you what they thought they knew.
Right.
I mean, you could track, given who he says Harvey is. Wasn't there something? Isn't Harvey the one that meets Judith in New Orleans? So he's telling her that he knows he's going to be set up as a patsy. I think that's what Haslam said. So if he's telling her that, he must know that he's not going to get off the hook too. I mean, not expecting to get shot.
That's why he got off the bus and took a cab to...
Maybe.
I mean,
Yeah. John, what do you know about
Okay.
What do you know about NSA surveillance today? I mean, somebody told me, I don't know if it's true or not, that they pretty much can tape every single phone call in the world, and they just go back and hit the replay button if they need to,
They have Operation Harvest, which can tape up to 360,000 phone lines simultaneously. And that's old technology. So if I'm telling you about it, they're beyond it. But that capability they use computers then to listen to the phone conversations at high speed, and they listen for keywords. If they get a certain volume of keywords, then they actually tap the phone, and if it seems hot, eventually you might get a human ear on it. I mean, they certainly don't listen to everything that they can. No, they couldn't possibly. I mean, there wouldn't be any unemployment. We could all just listen to each other all day for a paycheck, people always ask me, do you think your phone's tapped? I said, I hope so. Maybe they'll learn something. What the hell? I wish they would listen to me.
As to what Oswald knew, we do know something, and that's because of the note that he purportedly sent to Hosty.
Yes,
and
well,
the fact that it was destroyed
Shanklin's
tells us
daughter
a lot.
told me, and Jim Douglas said he asked her later, and she denied it, but Mae Brussel and Flo Kennedy and I, and Dave Dellinger was there, and he remembered it too later, unless she was somebody posing as Shanklin's daughter, but she came to us at a conference in New York, and she's a left activist. And Shanklin was the FBI agent in Dallas who told Hosty to tear up the note. Now, the note was said later to have been a threatening note to Hoover. Well, if it had been a threatening note to the FBI, it would have gone right up the chain to the top, I believe, in '63. It wouldn't have been kept. But she said, Daddy told me, Shanklin told me, that was a note from Oswald warning that they were going to kill JFK. So I certainly think one of the Oswalds knew and was penetrating the groups around it, and then got turned, into the chump, and then realized in the theater that he'd been had.
Who was this lady who said that the letter contained that? What was her name? And how did she?
She's Shanklin's daughter. Shanklin's the FBI agent in Dallas.
Franklin's daughter says that her dad said that the note said that.
Oswald was warning them that Kennedy would be killed.
Okay.
Was that what triggered the alert on the FBI wires, Kennedy's going to be killed, or was that from another source?
I don't know.
That happened before.
I don't know. I mean, that note was somewhat before that alert, I think.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't know. But we're getting around 11:30 and need to head to the Knoll. But I did want to say, people have asked me about COPA. We're not an individual membership organization. We were formed as a coalition of 3 groups. Only one of those groups really still with us, Committee for an Open Archives that Bill Kelly and I founded. We have tried to be a centering group for the researchers and to put our work together and to present the best evidence that we can every year, the serious forensic and ballistic and historical evidence, as well as the good work of independent researchers. And our main focus has been the JFK Records Act and getting files loose. We want to get a Martin Luther King Records Act passed this year. As soon as I get a number, I'll let everybody know it. You can pressure your congressperson, especially if they're sitting on the committees in the House Committee on Government Operations and Reform and the Committee on the Archives and the Freedom of Information Act stuff. Those are both key committees that could have hearings on it, and then we'll get another model of this passed, and I think it'll start to become the model for release of historical documents. So we continue to work on that. Bill Kelly wants to work on getting a grand jury. He also wants to get hearings related to the JFK Act. My feeling is that they don't care enough about the JFK Act at this point, even though it's mandated that they do hearings. But we could sneak hearings in through the Martin Luther King. If we can get hearings on that, we can say it's based on JFK and get them to take a look in those hearings at how the other things have been implemented.
Has Bill attempted to reach the DA here?
I don't know if he's contacted D.A. Watkins. I invited D.A. Watkins last 2 years, but I haven't gotten him.
I had an opportunity to meet him at a legal
okay.
seminar, and I brought reading material with me to give him. And when I mentioned the Kennedy assassination, he had kind of a look of horror on his face. So and he told me
who wants to put their head in that noose? But you
what
can.
He had when he first, he had said he believed it was a conspiracy.
Yes. Well, that's why.
But I think somebody got to him.
Well, we'd like him to open it up, but you have to petition them.
Well, back to your point is, you mean getting a grand jury here in Dallas County again to investigate that? Well, obviously, right? But,
New Orleans would be an option.
Well,
D.C. would be an option.
It's the jurisdiction here, and there's no statute of limitations on murdering anybody, whether it's a tramp or a president. So, I support it.
Right. Well, we also support the general idea. I mean, if you make it a federal grand jury, the FBI becomes the investigative team. So we'd rather have a local grand jury, but it is one idea to try to crack the thing open. New films may come out and continue to influence the public so the issues don't die. Pepper's trying to protect Sirhan. He lost another parole. They're thinking of moving him into general population, another prison, and
he could be out in the general public.
Right, which isn't good. It threatens him. It's the way Ray died. He got hepatitis from the knife stab he got, and we try to continue challenging the cases of the living, people that are set up, and get the evidence out. But of course, we're facing, like every other issue, a totally controlled Wurlitzer machine of propaganda that calls itself the media and a corporate entity. But like Cyril was saying yesterday, no matter what they do, and here they are having to get Tom Hanks and the whole team back up one more time, stick the little cardboard figures up, try to make it work. No matter what they do, they've never convinced the American public that we're wrong. I mean, and this was the beginning of the decline of public trust in government. Does not go to Watergate. It goes to the Warren Report.
You said Oswald was made, and you convinced him to come and talk, and he repeated his speech verbatim. Did he say anything else? Was there a picture made? You guys didn't take a picture, obviously.
No, we didn't take a picture. The 2 women who I was, housemates with at the time, I took about a month later, executive action came out, and when I told them I thought it was Oswald, they said, "What, are you crazy?" And I said, "Well, you haven't looked at the pictures. He does look like Oswald."
Did he say anything else?
He didn't say much else. I mean, he said that, and I asked him his address, and he said general delivery, but he identified himself at first and said he was Don Norton, and that's pretty much all he did. And then he took off. Well, I think it was Lee. I don't know. He's just using the name Don Norton as another way to,
He lives in what city you think? He said.
Well, he had lived in Florida, but now he's disappeared again.
John, how late is it getting?
Well, it's getting time to wrap up, so I'm trying. Yeah, so we got to get out of here and be over on the knoll. 12:30 would do the moment of silence. But thank you.